Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Rachel Koller Croft. Rachel is an author and screenwriter in Los Angeles, where she has scripted projects for Blumhouse, Sony Pictures Entertainment, and Comedy Central, among others. She lives by the beach with her husband, Charles, and their rescue pit bull, Juniper. Stone Cold Fox is her first novel. Check out this cover, first of all. Like, they did a great job, isn't it? Like, it's like the bling and it's gorgeous. I love this. Okay, so before we get deep diving into all the twisty, fun craziness that is Stone Cold Fox, welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle. I'm so excited to be here. Killer Women's what I'm all about.
Woo! Okay, so yeah, and first and foremost, please tell our listeners about Stone Cold Fox.
Oh, sure. Happy to set the scene. I mean, I lovingly call it my bitchy little novel about an ambitious young woman named Bee who was raised by a con artist mother, and she's ready to go straight and leave that life behind. So she has her sights set on marrying into the 1% via an unwitting eligible bachelor, Colin Case. And of course, for Bee, the challenge isn't really getting the ring from him, but rather the approval from his very fancy old money family and circle, in particular, his childhood best friend, Gail Wallace Lester, who has designs on taking Bee down as quickly as she can. So it becomes a cat and mouse game with a lot of twists and turns and strong women that are ready to go after what they want by any means necessary.
That is a very good description. It is absolutely that. And Gail is sort of an unassuming, we don't expect Gail to be quite as ruthless and clever as I think she's underestimated in the beginning, and Bee is a little bit thrown off by that. So I know it's hard. Like, I think sometimes we know exactly where the seed for a story comes from, and sometimes we're like, it was a culmination of things. But can you remember sort of how, where this story started?
Yeah, I mean, Bee's voice kind of came to me first, and like, I'll cop to it. She's kind of an amalgamation of the dark sides of like my best friends and me, just like a lot of her like snark and signature humor.
Right.
And I think that's like a product of, growing up in the early 2000s, where the perception of women was really grim and specific and harsh. And even though we all know we aren't supposed to think these things about ourselves, it's really hard when it's so ingrained in your youth to kind of drop it as you grow older. So I find Bee a kindred spirit in that regard. Like, I understand why she thinks the things she thinks and why she says the things she says. So I kind of just started riffing with her voice a little bit at the start. And then I'm also just very fascinated by the push and pull of extreme wealth and how it can be repulsive and aspirational in equal measure, and the type of woman that aspires to marry into money. I think that makes her a compelling main character, but I really wanted to think about how to subvert that gold digger trope that everyone probably will at the start of the novel make assumptions about Bee, but I just think there's a lot more to her than meets the eye as the story continues. But that was sort of the beginning of where the seed came from.
Yeah, I mean, and actually what makes, like you said, to sort of subvert that trope, what makes her so interesting is that her past is very, her whole goal in life is to not be like her mother, right? I mean, it really comes up for her that, every sort of decision she makes, she's like, that is not a decision my mother would make. So I mean, and it's as we get to understand, more and more about what it was like to be her mother's daughter, we do get a really clear sense of why she would not want to be like her mother, and how damaging that is. That it really was an environment where it's what's the next best thing? How much can I get from this situation? And then how soon can we kind of get out? And that is not a stable upbringing, right? That would do damage to any of us.
Of course. And that's the thing that I think is kind of cool and interesting about B. She's not really that interested in the material stuff that the money can give her. It's truly all about finally getting some safety and security that she was completely lacking as a child. And that's really her full motivation. Does she like nice things? Sure. Don't we all? But that's
Right.
not really what it's about. And she can see through a lot of what that stuff is. And it's really just about feeling safe for her. And that's what
Right.
money represents to be.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, there is something interesting. And of course, we've all come across those people, and we know the stories too, about how exclusive and sort of incestual that those old money, communities are, and how unaccepting they are of new people, and how it's always the assumption that they're whoever comes into the group is there for the money. And God, B really offers Colin something that he doesn't get from anybody in his, family and that community. And I think he's actually quite lovely in the way that he, sort of accepts her and stands up for her. And I mean, the question is sort of how much could he tolerate, and the standing up to his family and whatnot. And his mother is very much what we expect from, the matriarch of that kind of family. Like, we don't talk about problems. There are no problems.
Right.
It's so, yeah.
Colin is a very well-meaning person, and I wanted to be not gentle with him. And like, I do, some of my favorite parts to write are when B is like burning Colin about his weak shoulders or his topsiders and things like that.
Yeah.
But he knows he's a nice man, and that is
Right.
also very appealing to her. And as far as like Colin's mother, she may or may not be based on an ex-boyfriend's mother.
We will not name names.
Yeah, but I think, it's that feeling protective of anyone from the outside, because, the people that aren't in our circle just won't understand. It's easier to keep it in the circle. Can't you just find a nice girl that we already know and love, like, instead of bringing this outsider into the fold? But I think that is the appeal, a lot of the appeal for Colin and B. I mean, obviously she's like hot and funny and all these things, but she is like completely different from anyone he's gone out with before. And she
Right.
listens to him and makes him feel special and makes him feel seen and heard, because he's kind of a more timid man in some regards, which I think is why she pinpoints him in a lot of ways. But for as loveless, I guess we could say, as their relationship is, at least from B's perspective, I do think it's one of like respect, and both of them get things from each other. So I don't want to say it's 100% healthy, but it's certainly not
Right.
sinister as maybe some people who see the cover and see the synopsis might think, as far
Right.
as
It's much more nuanced, and I think that's another thing that just makes it a really interesting story, is that there are expectations about sort of exactly what this is going to look like. And there's a trope about these wealthy men that are these kind of like commanding, it's they know exactly what they want, and they get to dictate everything. And I think Colin is a foil to that, which I appreciate too, because I mean, we all are. I mean, we all have insecurities, and Colin's clearly has them, and yet he's in a family that sort of doesn't tolerate that either, right?
Right.
And so he's clearly not gotten a lot of sort of love and reinforcement around those points. So it absolutely makes sense. And and then the sort of the backdrop of this mother, and their past is, and I love the way you sort of alternate. You were in the present, and then we're back with some, and there was a lot of, like, actually B had a lot of love from some of those, like, healthy kind of parental, at least father figure love in some of those earlier moments, which is why it was probably all that much more devastating when they were moved on, right? So you're a script writer, and I'm obviously you know how to do that, I'm sure, super well. So what prompted you to be like, I'm going to write a novel?
Oh, a lot of things. I've always wanted to write a novel. I mean, since I was a little girl, that's been on my list. And I think the reason, not that it took me a long time, but by the time I got around to it, I just felt basically, I think screenwriting made me a better novelist because I just had developed a really good understanding of story and pacing and making sure your audience stays with you. And what was exciting to me about writing a novel as opposed to using the story as a script is just there's so much more real estate to work with. Like my first draft of this, I think just by virtue of being a screenwriter, was really snappy and concise. And I had to go back and I got to spend more time on what are they wearing? What are they listening to? What does the room look like? What's she thinking on the inside? Because everything on the screen has to be more or less on the exterior. And what I really loved about writing this novel is I got to stay in Bee's head the entire time and really sit with her interiority and kind of the dichotomy of what she's thinking and how she's acting, which isn't always the easiest thing to do in a script. So I enjoy both mediums enormously. But now I've realized I do love writing books and I plan to continue down that path. I think I was intimidated because I read so much. I love so many books, and just what I do as a screenwriter, it's just short. It's just not as many words. And I was like, how the hell is my whole book? And then once you do it once and you get the bug going, because now I feel like, okay.
And it's also like, I mean, the script is like you're one part of a novel, right? You're the story. But when you write a novel, you're the director, you're the actor, you're everybody kind of all at once, right? And I think it is different. I mean, I in reverse, I've read a lot of scripts and been like, oh, I wonder if I could adopt one of my own books. And I think, oh God, no way. I wouldn't know, how would you get rid of all those words? It's
you
sort
have
of
to kill many darlings and go in different directions. And I think the best way to think about it, and which I will do if I'm lucky enough to adapt Stone Cold Fox in future books, is you just have to think of them kind of as separate entities and an opportunity to tell a different story with characters you already love. And like what's the medium, because a reader needs something different than someone sitting and watching something. You just do.
Absolutely.
Which is not, the easiest thing necessarily for certain creators, because you're attached to how it is, in whatever medium you started in. But no, I think for me, I write like so character forward that I'm like excited about potentially writing stories with the same characters that I love so much, just on screen or in a book or what have you.
So okay. So tell us about that. So do you think this is is there another Bee story, another Bee and Colin story? It seems like there definitely could be.
Yeah, I really hope to write a sequel to Stone Cold Fox. It's sort of like why I left the cliffhanger. And it's funny to see early responses to the end of the novel, because some people really love it and some people are like, what the hell? But I like that, because then people have something to talk about and there's conversation to be
all publicity is good publicity, as they say, right?
No. And I don't like to tie things up in a bow with any of my stories, even my scripts. It's like, let people kind of ruminate and think what they want, because that's more fun. But I would very much like to write a sequel to Stone Cold Fox, so I hope to do that at some point in the future.
So what was it like? How is it different? So when you write a script, are you also working alone, or are you sort of doing in a collaborative format? So is it different than, in addition to being sort of a different, medium, is it also like a different environment because you're alone?
For me personally, I've only written alone with scripts. So features and television are a little different. Most of all of my produced work, I've sold a lot of things, but things don't always get actually made. But my first film came out last year, and that was, I wrote it, we sold it to Blumhouse, and feature writers some people write in a partnership, like with two people. I just tend to write alone. With a TV show, I've sold a couple where they've purchase the pilot and then I write the pilot, but it hasn't like gone to series where you have a room. But then typically you're in a writer's room with many people and you hammer out scripts together and it's more collaborative. But in my career thus far, I've been writing alone, which I honestly do enjoy. I mean, I think I enjoy a collaborative situation too, but it's funny, my husband is always like, no, you're not, because I identify as an introvert, but that's only because I enjoy having alone time and I need it to kind of recalibrate before I go back out and be social again, because I think I present quite extroverted, but I like
I actually think that's a very common attribute to writers. I also am definitely an introvert, but you put me at a writers conference and people will be like, wow, that lady knows everybody. And it's because it's that one, it's a time to be extroverted and energetic. And there's all these people that you want to talk to and you haven't seen. And we're so excited because it's our people and it's our craft and whatever. But then literally like the third day, I like collapse for like 2 weeks and I have to I'm like,
Like,
nobody talk to me.
yeah, like you can like shut down even in the middle of a conversation. Sometimes we'll go to some party and like I'm having a great time, but when I'm ready to go home, it's like I'm ready to go home. And I feel like I like turn into like a ghost of myself.
Right. You're like, will you excuse me while I go to the bathroom and then
Right.
disappear out the back door? I
I'm gonna sit
totally.
there
I'm
until
known
time.
for my Irish goodbyes for exactly that reason. Sometimes it just gets to be too much. I love you all, but I have to leave.
I have to.
So how is it different than, in terms of, obviously because for the size of it, but when you're writing a script, are you writing a certain word count a day? Do you outline and what's your process for that? And then how is it different for this?
For screenwriting, I do outline, but I would say they're brief. I like to know where I'm working towards because there are just certain things, and I don't want to say it's formulaic because it's not. I think that's selling screenwriting short, but there is an expectation of emotional beats and plot points that you're expected to hit. So I like to know what those are before I start drafting. It just makes the process easier. It makes it easier to sell because sometimes I think a lot of screenwriters prefer to sell their idea and then be paid to write it. And if you're selling an idea, you do have to have an outline and like sell your story and where it's going.
Right.
So for scripts, I typically know where I'm going. But, and this happens to me now with novel writing too, I leave room to play because when I'm writing, something happens. And I think that happens for a lot of writers. And I'm not even like a woo-woo person, but there is something I just literally feel like touched. And it's like, oh, I would have been impossible to think of in the outline stage. It just wouldn't come to me in that way. But when I'm actually in the characters and what they're doing, and the second I think, oh, what if I took them over there? Like, I always the way I put it is like, how can I make their lives more difficult?
Yes, right. Up the
Yes.
challenge, increase the conflict.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I just don't think of it until I'm writing and something clicks and I'm like, oh, this would actually fuck it up for them or screw it
Right.
up for them.
This is going to make it way messier.
Yeah. And those moments typically happen while I'm in flow and while I'm writing. Not exclusively, but most of the time. And that happened when I wrote Stone Cold Fox, which I admittedly wrote the first draft just pantsing it. Like it was just in B's voice and wanted to get everything that was in my head out of me. And then when I went back, I did a pretty robust outline knowing who she was, who the characters were, where it was going to go. But then even when I went back in, one of the things I love that happens is characters usually sneak in that I had no idea of until they showed themselves to me. And like Ren Daly in Stone Cold Fox is a perfect example of that. She's a tertiary character, but she is so funny. Yeah. And I love how B like uses her to make herself seem like a normal person.
Right.
I mean, it was just so fun to have her there. And I did not conceive of her at all when I was outlining.
She's a total sacrificial lamb in the bridal party. I do love it too. Yeah, I wondered about that. And so basically then when you went back to write, did you sort of take what you had? I mean, I know some people, this is seems crazy to me, but I know authors who write an entire draft and once they finish the draft, they know exactly what the book's supposed to be. So they throw away the first draft and start over. Was it like that? Or was it like, I'm going to work with this sort of mess I have and carve it and shave it and mold it?
It does feel like I wrote two books in some ways. So I had the first draft that I kind of wrote on my own time. Like I hadn't sold it yet or anything. I was like, I'm going to try to write a novel. Here we go. And the way I found my literary agent was through my screenwriting representation. And she really responded to the first draft, but she had a lot of wonderful and intense notes. And I thought, okay, it's going to be a revision. And then when I really got back in, I mean, I kept almost nothing from that first draft. The spirit of B for sure, but it really became something else entirely because my agent, it's very funny. She goes, well, you do realize you wrote a story about a complicated mother-daughter relationship. And I was like, oh, I guess I did. So like in my first draft, mother wasn't as much in the forefront for B.
Yeah.
It was kind of just peppered in a little bit. And then by bringing that more into the conversation, the flashbacks weren't a part of the first draft. And
I wondered. Yeah.
it
Interesting.
just kind of made her character richer,
Yes.
and just felt more three-dimensional. So yeah, I had to go back and really dig into Mother as well, because she's a
Mother. I know Mother. God, she is quite the, I mean, she does bring, I mean, I can imagine her on screen. That is, super interesting. Well, I think that makes sense. It's actually amazing and wonderful that you had an agent really respond, because I think sometimes you have to have an agent who can really see kind of where the story could go. And some agents are really good at that. And some agents just, are like, well, if you revise it, I'd look at it again kind of thing. So
I'm very lucky. My agent has a very editorial lens in how she likes to work with her clients. And that was very helpful, especially as I wrote my first novel. But like even going forward, I just feel like she gets what I'm doing. She gets my taste. And I just got very lucky that she was the first agent I met and we hit it off, because I know that is not always the experience. So that was some divine intervention or something.
that was right. So how long before you, and of course, having had already, a successful career in screenwriting, of course, it makes sense that you would be able to, make connections faster, because you already have people, you had already were a proven entity, which is very important in this field and most fields, and makes total sense. Now, take us back to sort of when did you know you were going to wanted to be a screenwriter? Like, did you go to school for that?
I knew I wanted to be a writer. I got my degree in English literature, and it was always something that I wanted to do. Whether I thought I could took me a little longer to get there.
Sure.
And it's not because so I'm from Chicago. I'm from a pretty practical family. No one's really in the arts. They were always very encouraging of me, but I didn't really have an example as far as like, how would I actually go about doing that? And I think when I went to get like my first job, it was just like, okay, so my first job, I moved out to California in 2009, and I got a job at a very popular celebrity gossip blog. And that turned out to not be my calling at all. I actually moved back to Chicago for a couple of years and thought, I don't know. I conflated LA with that job.
Right.
I was like, okay, I don't think this is for me. And so I've had a lot of weird jobs before I actually settled on screenwriting. So in Chicago, I think it was a very fortuitous detour. I worked in sales, because no one tells screenwriters that 80% of that job is sales. So I
bet.
Mostly in travel and hospitality companies. And one of the companies I was working for, I became the top salesperson. I was selling luxury floral arrangements to hotels, residential buildings, places that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on flowers every year. And so they wanted to open the market in LA, and I loved LA in a lot of ways. And I was like, oh, and if I'm doing a job I like, it'll be a totally different experience, whatever. So I move out here. It kind of works out. I take a couple other sales jobs, but then I start going out with this guy that's a screenwriter. And long story short, we had a super gnarly breakup, and I was very motivated by spite, and that's just who I am. And I said, well, if that guy can do it, I certainly can. So I wrote my first script, and I sold it a few months later to Sony.
That's awesome. I mean, I think that's women power right there. Be like, yeah, you can do it. Well, I can do it better. That's fantastic.
Very motivating to me. And it was a fortuitous thing where I submitted the script to this contest that's affiliated with the Academy Awards, and I advanced, and it was all very exciting. And it was the first year you could purchase the reader comments, so I did. And most of them were super helpful. But the last one, I don't remember the whole thing, but I remember the sentence clear as day. And it was, judicious alterations. This might make a good porno because the girls sound hot, at least on the page. Danielle, the way I like, first of all, I paid for this.
Right.
Second of all, that has nothing to do with the content of the script. It was just someone like making it because later they were like, well, he gave you a good score. I'm like, I don't care. Like, this is not
what an asshole, right?
Oh, I went on the Facebook page for the contest thinking the moderator and 10 people are going to see this, but like I have to stand up for myself or I'm going to lose it. So I just copy pasted the note and said, considering the current climate for women in Hollywood, wanted to bring this to your attention. And it was one of those weird things that went viral on Twitter. So then on Facebook, journalists are wanting to talk to me. And it's like, I'm a writer, but I'm a businesswoman too. And I know if my script is in the news, people are going to want to read it. And then about a week later, my script sold, and I've been working pretty steadily as a screenwriter ever since. So it's whatever that quote is about like preparation and luck, like in meeting the moment. And I was able to meet that moment because I had that script, but then I had other scripts ready to go as well. So that when representatives started reaching out and they were like, what else do you have? I was like, well, this, that, and the other thing. And so
Good for you. Isn't that so? I mean, and in many ways, that asshole, you could, there's a little gratitude we can give that guy, not much, but a little bit, right? I mean, and good for you.
Tell you, right? Like I
Right?
really do take everyone loves praise. I love it too. But there is something, I don't know if it's kind of sick about me, but like anytime something like bad happens, I just let it like fuel me and like propel me into the next thing.
Yeah.
Kind of always been that way. And it's
You
really
and B have that in common, I think,
yeah, I mean,
actually.
I'd be lying if I said there weren't little parts of me and B, but not all.
Right, of course not, right, of course not. But that is super interesting. So, and that was when did that all
That
that
was
happen?
all like pretty much 2014, 2015.
So fantastic. That's amazing. So, okay, and so then, are you? I mean, you are you're gonna adapt it, right?
I
Are you
hope
waiting for somebody to want to sort of? You're not gonna just adapt it without
right.
somebody.
I can't say what's going on, but there's
Uh,
conversations being had. So
I
I'm
love
excited
it.
to see what happens there. And then also just like once it's out in the world, I'm so excited to see more readers respond and just kind of, I mean, my biggest wish is that people have a great time reading it because that's why I wrote it. Like I wanted
Yeah.
to write the book I wanted to read and have it be very character forward while still having a compelling plot, but like people that feel real or maybe someone you cross paths with and get a kick out of. They
So,
make you laugh.
my dog is like scratching herself, and so her she's jingling. Okay, Scotia, lay down. Well, yes, exactly. It's a super fun read. I mean, it's got all the sort of makings of like, the revenge plot plus like, I mean, just the women empowerment in sort of whatever way, you can make yourself empowered in this world, where men have the upper hand, where wealthy people have the upper hand, where, I mean, people like Gail, who is, the family friend, who's, without ruining anything, she is definitely wants Colin to not be with B, and she's formidable. So
Certainly,
I certainly what?
she certainly is. I worked really hard on her, even though I don't like her.
Well, right, we don't have to like her, but I mean, she's got chutzpah, right? I mean, she definitely is not gonna go lightly, and she works pretty hard to, get things to go her way. I was curious because I feel like it's so funny because people always ask me like, who would play so and so in your books, and I don't even I'm like the worst because I don't even really pay attention, and everybody now in Hollywood seems so young that I'm like I don't know. But I was curious if you had like, and again, I know you're in conversations and there's going to be an incredible cast, and these people are probably not going to be it, but like if you were going to dream or imagine, could you tell us who you think would play sort of be Colin and Gale, or an
Yeah,
example of it?
I can tell you who like I pictured when I'm writing because I
Mhm.
feel like I started writing this in 2019 and then, a lot of time passes because I do think there are some like younger girls that may be more suited to be if and when it comes because by the time this is
Right,
but
right,
well,
exactly.
we're talking about like peak hotness. I mean, I pictured Margot Robbie a lot
Of
because
course, yes,
she's
of course.
outrageously hot and just
Outrageously hot.
I mean, and that's how I pictured B. Just someone that is like, God damn, how do you walk around like that? Like, because to just be
Right.
like that so arrestingly beautiful. I think also makes her compelling and interesting, because I'm sure for as much as you get out of that in life, it's probably also a curse in a lot of ways, considering lecherous men and then
Right.
women maybe not liking you because you're so beautiful. I think, I think there's a lot to chew on there. So I did picture Margot Robbie. Um, Colin is funny because I don't think this is the right casting either, but I was very inspired by Succession, and I pictured Jeremy Strong quite a bit, and the character specifically of Kendall Roy, just kind of a
Yeah.
like, "Daddy, please love me." Kind
Yeah. That's a great show. And
of
it's a very, I can totally see that, of course.
yeah. And then Gail's kind of tricky because I
Yeah.
actually don't think, because we're in B's head.
Yeah.
So I don't think Gail is as like hideous as B is claiming her to be. I think she might just be kind of plain and doesn't put that much effort into the things that B thinks she has to put effort into.
Right. Right.
So I did sort of picture, and this is also not correct, but this like vibe, like Selma Blair and Legally Blonde, for example, just kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the Vivian
Mm-hmm.
Kensington type of character. But yeah, definitely a brunette.
Yeah, right. Just, I mean, at the very least, to be a contrast to our incredibly beautiful blonde bee. That is, yeah, it's so interesting. I love it. There's a part in the book where Colin gets a little soft, and I think I was, it's so my generation. I'm like, oh, it's kind of like it's a little bit like Hugh Grant. You know what I mean? There's that kind of like a little not kind of
Yeah,
all
he
together.
he doesn't command the room, but
Mm-mm.
people like him. I mean, B
Mm-hmm.
always says that. She goes, "Is he the funniest guy in the room? Is he the hottest guy in the room?" Not
Right.
really. People like him, and he's a
Yeah.
nice guy, and he means well, and that for B especially counts for a lot.
Yes, of course it does, which makes I mean, again, it makes just, which I think is like you said, the characterization is really strong because it makes, um, based on her, what we know about B, what we learn about her, all of this makes really sense. I was looking at my phone because I have a screenshot that I took from I read it on my Kindle, but I love the idea. So there's part of the book is that B doesn't really have a lot of really close friends, right? And some of that is because she's very guarded. But in addition, she makes a comment which I think is really interesting. She basically, there's this line that says, "I'd argue that men are relatively easy to read, but women have real depth and darkness, to the point that you never really know what we're thinking. Women have actual layers under our societally mandated glossy veneers. So many unknowns," which I think is so. It is an interesting thing, and I think some of the most intensely brutal, stuff we see is women on women, right? We can be unbelievably awful to each other, and I think men, they live at a different level. But I thought that was such a valid, and to your point, the sort of the way B sees the world and the way she's sort of guarded, especially around women.
Yeah, I mean, your first relationship with a woman is her mother, so that's not ideal for her. And
Mm-mm.
then, you see, because the flashbacks are these kind of vignettes in different stages of her life, and never really bonds with any of the girls because she also knows they're probably not going to stay that long. So I feel like she never fully had a good relationship with another woman, and that's why when she meets the character of Syl, she's very intrigued by it, but rightfully a little afraid. But as far as like the larger sense of it, I just think I am such a girl's girl and I have so many girlfriends. But I think, you go through life and sometimes you grow apart and all of these things. And for as sad as I've been with any breakup with a guy, oh, no one can hurt your feelings like another girl or your mother for that matter. I just think there are things we can reach into and say and do to twist the knife that,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just like on another level. And I don't think it's this like, oh, women aren't nice to women sort of stuff. I just think we're complicated and navigating being a woman in a man's world. And sometimes we
Right.
get out on each other, which is too
Right.
bad. But I think it's a fact of life and something we've
I
all
also, I think it's a little of a patriarchal construct too, that basically, there's definitely an environment where it's much better for society, for men in society, if women don't always, it's like the sort of, working mother versus stay-at-home mother, that I use that example all the time, because it's like somebody is telling us there's only one right answer, and it surely can't be us, right? So it comes from this sort of societal, I probably seated by a man who thought, let's, because there's that other quote that's like, if women could rule the world, if we could just all get along, right? It's kind of like, I think that's true too. But like you said, I think we put so much more faith in some ways in our female friendships, because we know those are people who are going to understand us better, and who have, have more life experiences, and who see the world more like we do. And so when those don't work out, it can be very, very devastating. So it makes sense. And Syl, we won't go into Syl, but I think she is, and she's a really different person than other women that B is with and runs into. And I think she's another lovely sort of foil, and in that way, and in other ways, which you have to read the book to find out. So okay, so tell us, this is coming out. It's actually, when you hear this podcast, which will be February 16th, it's out. It came out on Valentine's Day, which is, as we discussed, super clever. And now that you're over your Valentine's Day celebrations, whatever those look like, you got to pick up this book and read what B was up to. But what are you working on now? What's next?
Yeah, I just finished the first draft of my second novel, which just about killed me, because I wanted to finish it. My husband and I basically skipped Christmas. Like, I was like, whatever, it comes around every year, I got to get this done, because I really wanted to enjoy this time with my first book coming out. So I knew if I got the first draft on, as painful as it was on some days, I knew it would be a future gift to myself, and it certainly has been. And I'm actually really happy with how it turned out, and the early feedback is good. So I don't anticipate the situation where I'm writing two books. Like, I think I'll just get to revise this, which I'm excited to do. I can't say too much about it yet, but I can share that it'll still sound like me, but it's not the sequel to Stone Cold Fox, and it's kind of playing in a different world. But music plays a huge part in the story, which I'm excited about. And it might even be a little bit spooky. So.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I think I can't remember if we were talking about this on air. Now my brain is frying, but I think we talked about the fact that there is definitely room in the ending of Stone Cold Fox for a sequel. And you sort of talked about, you're not somebody who likes to tie things up in a bow, which I think it really does leave us ruminating and sort of going back. And I think that's it's really great for getting people buzzing and talking. And not everybody likes that. I of course, but that's good too, right? I mean, we're supposed to sort of, I think thoughtful fiction is supposed to make us think and a little uncomfortable, and but you didn't write that next, but you think somewhere down the line there could be a
Well,
sequel.
Danielle, my hope is the public all but demands it.
We just need to start, right? You need a hashtag, bring back B, and just
I honestly, I feel like I could write like 100 books as B. She is so funny, and I really enjoy being in her head, and I have a lot of love and care for her despite her monstrous tendencies. And I think by the end of this first book, I mean, maybe some people disagree with me, but I think she has a very clear arc, and you see some growth in her in certain ways. And I just think she's a really juicy character I like spending time with. So I hope to write more of her story in the future.
And there's a sort of a sort of last twist, which we're not going to talk about, but is that there's another piece that, rises to the forefront too, which is sort of like, okay, now what's what's that gonna do? So I think
look like? I know exactly what you're talking about, and I really want to dig into that, because
I think that's
a massive overcorrection for her, maybe.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. Yes. So we're not going to, we cannot talk more about that. But if you read the book, you will know exactly what we mean when you get to those last pages, because we're like, oh, I did not see that coming either. So, and it is actually, I mean, there is, there's a few men in the story. I mean, for sure. And as you said, those vignettes that include B's early life include, some of those actually, most of them really lovely stepfather figures. But there are also some, some dangerous male characters in the book as well, which I think is, I really appreciate a book that doesn't vilify all the men, or all the women, or all the wealthy people, or all the, you know what I mean? It's just a very, there is darkness, in most of them, and also really lightness in most of them. And I think that is so, it feels so real, it's so authentic, and it's really fun to sort of see what pushes us to the dark and what draws us to the light, right?
Well, and I think like anybody, we all have our pluses and minuses, right? Depending on, and in different phases. I mean, with the stepfather characters, I wanted to be really cognizant of that. And I just remember when you turned a certain age, that change in how men you don't know perceive you is very shocking. And you're very young still.
Right.
So there's a character who doesn't really, she just knows how he's looking at her. It's the someone her mother's married to when she's a teenager.
Yeah.
Nothing really perverse happens. It's just she can feel the way he's looking at her, and
Right.
how her friends that she made, their dads look at her when they're going to the dance. Like, she just has this marked change.
Yeah. Right.
She's noticed that when she was little and alone, women would want to help her. And now that she's bombshell teenager, she even feels like, maybe from some of her teachers and stuff, that people just perceive her to be a certain type of woman,
Right.
a girl.
Right. When all she's done is like develop in a way that she had zero control over, right? I mean, I think there is something about this. It's almost like being preyed on, that you just feel like all of a sudden the world is you sort of look like, you feel like you might be somebody that they want to prey on. And it feels, we're too young, mentally we're not ready for that. And yet the world does not seem to care. I mean, I have a 23-year-old daughter, and I remember she was like 11 and we were skiing, and she's a beautiful skier because we're in Montana. And all of a sudden there's these hoots and hollers coming from the ski lift before. And I mean, I remember, and I'm this kind of mom, but I just stopped and was like, she's fucking 11. Like,
Yeah.
cut it out. Now you can't tell under a helmet and whatever, because she was tall and her dad's tall. But I was like, it's so gross that is your response to, and of course, I'm sure they told me off again, but whatever. I mean, the point is that it just is something you want to protect your children from, you want to be protected from, and yet society does not really have, we've not taught in general our young men to be respectful.
Or the older, I
or
think
anybody, right?
Woman has these memories from when they were about that age, right? Like 11,
Right.
12. And everything just feels different, and you don't know why.
Right.
And because you are so little, and it's just it's like this coming of age terrible thing that
Right.
you feel powerless to. It's just become, you just have to like look alive now, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
it is.
And it's when I think it's when girls start to sort of hunch, to sort of put, and we start to look down, and it's when we lose a lot of confidence that otherwise, and a lot of playfulness that otherwise we had and felt safe doing when we were younger. And that it's a very common, very big loss. And it's not the first time I've had this conversation on this podcast, because I think it is absolutely true, and it happens. And I love that acknowledgement that is a real thing that we have to contend with, that nobody should have to contend with, right? I mean, because your body is very much not, I mean, some of it is really just not in your control. So, well, okay. So tell us now, where can we find you? Where can people find you? Obviously they can get your book anywhere. Stone Cold Fox, and is out on the 14th of February. And I actually say, I love this color. This is like this, right?
Too. When I saw the cover for the first time, I literally screamed, because you never know what you're gonna get. That's what I heard. It's like, okay, you hope for the best, but the marketing folks know what they're doing, and blah blah blah.
Yes,
and they obviously did. I mean, I saw the cover of my dreams.
Yeah, and sometimes they do know what they're doing, but you're like, really? Do you know what you're doing? And sometimes you see something and you think, Oh yeah, you do know what you're doing. And actually I love this because sometimes your book will be, it'll be spine out in the bookstore and
Yeah.
it's
It's a
hard to be
beacon of light.
hard to look away. People are going to be like, what's that hot yellow neon? I got to look
I
at that one. So it's really, really beautifully done. It's so fun. Okay. So sorry, we can find you on what's your favorite?
I'm mostly on Instagram at Rachel Koller Croft. And then I have a Twitter, but I'll be very honest with you, I very rarely use it. TikTok scares me. And I also have a website, rachelkollercroft.com. And I do a newsletter on there too. But Instagram, I'm pretty active on. I do stories and I like to post about movies I'm seeing and books I'm reading and other little things here and there. I try to be entertaining on Instagram. I'm comfortable with it and it's fun and I enjoy it.
It's so funny. Well, you're younger than I am, and TikTok is terrifying. My daughter was trying to like teach me. I'm like, no, I'm beyond. I'm too old. So okay, Rach Koller, and Koller is Koller,
Yes.
Croft, Kroft. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find her. We will tag you up the storm with this and with pictures and whatnot. And it's so fun. So thank you. Oh my gosh, so much for joining me today and talking about the book and your inspirations. And I will look very forward to the spooky music, but it makes me think of all these. I have all, immediately my mind paints a million pictures, which I'm sure are totally incorrect. But I will look very forward to that. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Danielle. I had a blast. I appreciate it.
And for everybody joining us today, this was Killer Women Podcast with Rachel Koller Croft and your host, Danielle Girard. And we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.